I'm Brandon, and welcome to Tansson TV Plus.
And I'm Mom. Thank you for joining us again today.
Yeah, we always enjoy doing this. And Mom, what show are we speaking about here today on our first episode Friday with a little modification?
Yes, we are talking about Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yes, and speaking of that modification, so oftentimes for here we speak about the actual first episode of the series premiere, but this time we're doing things a little bit different. We are actually speaking about the pilot episode, which oftentimes is the series premiere, but it's not in this case. It's actually episode 3 of the series.
Yeah, and I thought it was important that we talk about this particular episode because I think it lays the groundwork for the particular series. It looked like when I looked at the first episode per se to see the description, it talked about the series already starting, so like in the middle of basically an episode. And so I kind of wanted to go to the beginning and the why, and which is why I chose this particular pilot as our, in my mind, the first episode.
Yeah, so definitely, if you all want us to, we can always check out the original first 2 episodes later. But I'm excited for us to check out this pilot from September 23rd, 1975. And Mom, you can go ahead and give the synopsis.
Alrighty, we are first introduced to the teacher of this particular class, and like Brandon kind of mentioned, this is because it is back to school month. We are once more tackling another school related TV show, and welcome. And Carter in this particular episode is a teacher, and so we begin with his wife, and then he goes straight into the classroom. I will say immediately the first thing that he does with his wife is he talks about how he is going back to the school where he actually went to as a high school student. He's going back to the same town, of course, the same community. And in essence, he later finds out the same classroom he was in as a student. He is a first, from my understanding, it seems like a first year teacher. So he goes into the school where he meets the same assistant principal who was there when he was there. Now I will say the episode goes back and forth whether or not this is the assistant principal and the principal, but we're initially introduced as him as this particular gentleman being the assistant principal, and he finds out that he will be teaching the Special Guidance Remedial Academics Group, which is known as the Sweat Hogs Group, which is a group that he is one of the people who named when he went to this school years ago. We are based on the information that we know that the principal, Mr. Carter, is between 26 to 28 years old, and so he goes into this classroom. Now, I do want to go back a little bit and talk about head of the class, only because we have the same thing going on in the regards that we have a principal who's concerned about one particular class. And we talked about head of the class last week, where the principal was concerned about his his higher level group. Well, in this school, this particular principal is concerned about the sweat hog group. And so the first thing this teacher has to do is try to build rapport with the kids, and he kind of teases them a little bit in order to try to make this rapport, and actually ends up kind of talking to himself in the midst of doing all of this. But he does get to know his students, and that's one of the things that we discovered, of course, in the first episode, is that they do everything they can to try to get to know the students, the characters in this particular show. And so we have one person who basically introduces them. Unlike head of the class, there are only 4 or 5 students in here that we're concentrating on rather than 10 students. And so he gets to know them, but then at the same time, the teacher quits pretty quickly. But his kids, the kids in the class, the teenagers rather, they really like him, and they come to his apartment later. Now they do it, and he's not quite aware that they're coming over, but he comes there, and they kind of, by their speaking to him, the wife is actually and likes them, and he realizes he kind of needs to go back to these students because he needs to make a difference with them. And so that is this episode in a nutshell. It truly is an introductory type of episode.
Well, of course, Mom, thank you so much for the synopsis.
You are welcome, Brandon.
Yeah, and to go into this just a little bit further, so yeah, I like the comparisons between this and head of the class, and it's really interesting that sort of the principal has uh, and both of them has a sort of particular type of class that they focus on, and it doesn't seem like they really ever visit any other classes, and so for both of them too. Whereas in head of the class, Mr. Moore is a new substitute teacher who apparently has a lot of classes, but we only see the first period. This one, it seems that uh, that Kotter actually is a full fledged teacher. He has his degree in teaching, but we only see him with the one class. We don't know if he's there for the whole day or just the one class or whatever. But this one definitely seems like a history class.
Yeah, and that's another coincidence between both of them. They both teach history.
Yeah, and so, but I'm curious as to if Mr. Kotter, has any other classes on his schedule, similar to how Mr. Moore did, but yet we just never saw it.
Yeah, apparently it's this group of kids that this same group of kids that he's going to be involved with, and I like that they try to introduce them to the cast, because one of the things that we talked about was, will this show focus on the teacher or will they focus on the students or will they do both? In this case, it seems like they're going to do both again because they did talk. His wife was in the beginning, so we know that there's going to be a focus with with himself, with his family, or at least we think we do based upon the first episode. And then with the students in there, with the approach that they took with one student actually talking about all of them, giving up the background of the students, even though very brief, you know that they're going to do both sides of the story on this particular show.
Yeah, and two things I wanted to note about that is one of them, since the students were sort of introduced to us, and but despite that, whereas on Head the Class, I think we spoke a lot about each of the individual students, whereas this one, like I said, it has a small group. But what's interesting is while the small group we're introduced to are all male, is that there is one female person, student, who is in the rest of the episode, but we're never really introduced to.
Yeah, we don't even know her name. If they mentioned it, I'm not sure what it is, but she shows up to the Cotter's house later, and her name is not said at that point in time either. So it's interesting that they're really concentrating on the guys in this, or at least in this first episode. It'll be interesting to see what future episodes bring. I will say that I've only seen bits and pieces of Welcome Back, Kotter. I have not seen the whole series at all the way through.
Yeah, as for me, truly the only thing I know at all is the theme song, which I think is just very iconic, and you know it immediately in my thought.
You do. And actually, I looked at the words this time after watching the beginning of it. The words actually are significant in the particular song because they refer back to Carter going back to teaching. And so, or going to back to the same place where he was. So, yes.
Yeah, and what's interesting is whereas, for this, that while Mr. Cotter wants to go back into teaching, is that he seems to have a lot of trouble with even finding work at all, but teaching is really his go-to passion. But yet he wants to be with high-achieving students and not necessarily with the students that came from the same backgrounds as him.
Yes, but his wife made a point about saying that this is where he needs to be.
Yeah, and actually, speaking of the wife, I wanted to actually speak a little bit about that. So, what exactly? I mean, did you perceive that we know about her based off of this episode, and then also too when the students sort of invaded their house? Like, I don't know. In the two times that we watched it, I got completely different perceptions of how she sees it from those two viewings.
I don't know. I'm a little confused about her. I don't think she works. If she does, they did not mention it. Um, she seems to be focused on the children and she adapted pretty well to them coming into the house once she got over the initial fear of them breaking in. But and she seemed to side with the students when speaking to her, and she kind of helped her husband understand that these kids needed help and they reached out to him, so he needs to continue to reach out to them. um, so that's what I could perceive initially from it. She was only in two scenes, so like I said, I'll probably have to watch some future episodes to see how that really goes.
Yeah, and I know for me, the first time I viewed it, yeah, I definitely saw her, adapting quickly, and she didn't seem to bother at all the fact that these random students are, which are complete strangers to her, coming in from the window, coming into the door, but in the second time I was able to view a little bit closer, and so like as the people are approaching her, she is like stepping back, and she looks a little bit more scared, but she still seems really easily adapted and not worried about these random strangers just bombarding in her house and stealing, but then returning her TV.
Yeah, yeah. It was an odd scene, only because they did really break into the house. Well, two of them did anyway. And then they went into their closet, which I thought was really odd too.
Yeah, but it's interesting though that I think what really sold them, sold the students on Mr. Cotter as a teacher per se, even though they admit otherwise, is that they kind of wanted to see what their future might be based off of seeing what he's doing now.
Yeah, they did. They did. And I thought it was interesting when they went back to class the next day that they were, well, he originally had given them some ideas. He wanted them to write a paper. And he had given some generic instructions. And of course, no one wanted to write a paper while he was there or even give a topic. But when they came back, all of them, with the exception of one, although he did verbally say something, they were able to give some really deep topics for papers that they were going to write.
Yeah, yeah. So that definitely was interesting, and he did verbally quit. And I think as a yeah, to compare the two series that we watch is that whereas in Head of the Class, Mr. Moore is less a substitute. Teaching is not his dream, but he wants to stay in the class. Whereas Mr. Cotter, for this series, he is a teacher. He wants to teach, but he wants to be as far away from the class as possible.
Yeah, and then the other thing is they both have unorthodox ways of actually reaching the students, and so of course, Mr. Moore had his stories, and Mr. Cotter had his. I hate to say insults, but he had a way to reach them and to actually get to them a different way.
Yeah, and so I think the question comes down to would we continue watching this series or perhaps even watch the pilot again or actually go to the first two episodes that we've never seen?
You know what, Brandon? For this one, I probably would go to the next two episodes, and maybe even the one after the pilot, just because I think for continuity, I'd be willing to do that to see how it kind of starts to blend together, and to see if I'd like to see how does he teach? I guess his approach. We just have his approach from that initial episode.
Yeah, I definitely would want to see more of the series as well, and I want to see how the students change and evolve overall, and like will they keep the same class all the way through? We saw a little bit to let the audience know right after we're seeing this. We saw like the first half of like I believe the season 4 premiere, which we thought was also entertaining. So I'm curious to see the development of the students as well.
And also, will the students change over the course of the time period?
Yeah, so we have all of that and more to figure out. And Mom, is there anything else that you want to say for this series? Welcome back, Cotter.
No, I was surprised that I liked it. So yes, so I will say I will go back and watch a couple more episodes.
Yeah, I definitely will do the same. And thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Mom, thank you always for joining me.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me, Brandon. Everyone, have a great day.
We'll see you next time.
All right, bye bye.